If you follow American politics at all, you've definitely seen the spectacle. I mean, it feels like every week there's a new feud erupting, just dominating the headlines. We're talking about that very public, often pretty vicious infighting. Ben Shapiro versus Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens taking on the establishment, Steve Bannon just setting fires everywhere he goes. On the surface, it looks like a massive personality clash or, maybe just a messy media war designed to get clicks. But the analysis we're diving into today, it's Freed Noven's Rebels Without a Cause, argues that we're fundamentally misreading the situation. This isn't just about personalities or some kind of moral breakdown. It's a deep structural crisis, one that's been brewing for years. So our mission today is to pull apart exactly what has broken. We want to understand the three core interlocking pillars that used to hold the American conservative coalition together, and which have now, it seems, completely collapsed. And that's what's leading to this very public civil war you're seeing play out.
What's so fascinating here, and what Novin really gets into, is that the conflict is fundamentally rooted in a failure of structure, not just emotion. He points to the collapse of those three pillars that, once stabilized the whole coalition. So the first is a shared governing philosophy. What do we actually want to do in power?
Okay.
Second, institutional legitimacy. Who gets to decide the rules of the game? And third, a credible path from grievance to power. I mean, how do you turn all that anger into actual statecraft?
All right, let's unpack this a bit because that's a lot right out of the gate. So the things we see, the public fights at America Fest, the implosion of the Heritage Foundation, these aren't the cause of the collapse. They're the symptoms.
Precisely.
So what does this mean for, the average conservative voter? It means they're fighting because there's just no agreement anymore on what authority even means or who has the right to wield it.
Exactly. And to understand the chaos now, we have to look at the one figure who managed to postpone this whole reckoning, Donald Trump. From 2016 onward, Trump functioned as what the analysis calls a personalized legitimacy engine. Think of him as a human pause button on all the ideological debates.
A pause button. How did that actually work?
Well, he just suspended the contradictions. I mean, traditionally, conservatism had to somehow reconcile these mutually incompatible factions, right? You had the free market people, the economic nationalists, the populists, the evangelicals.
We come under one roof.
And Trump didn't force them to resolve their differences. Instead, he replaced ideology with just simple, non-negotiable loyalty to him. And he replaced all the traditional institutions with his own voice, his own intuition. As long as you were loyal, your internal inconsistencies just didn't matter.
So that created this, decade-long buffer where all the messy internal contradictions were just sort of externalized onto one guy. But this is where it gets really interesting, as the analysis points out. With Trump in his constitutionally final term, that buffering function is, it's rapidly disappearing.
It's not just disappearing, it's failing. The political system, it naturally starts looking for the next center of power. And that vanishing buffer is forcing the movement to face all the questions it managed to avoid for 10 years.
Nice.
Well, is conservatism a governing philosophy with actual policies, or is it just a protest identity defined by what it hates?
Right.
And maybe most importantly, where does legitimacy come from now? Is it institutions? Is it elections? Or is it just, popular anger on social media?
So if those contradictions were already simmering, what was the specific spark, the thing that forced them all to the surface? We need that immediate catalyst.
The structural breakdown was latent, absolutely. But it needed a really disruptive event to turn that internal pressure into a full-scale rupture. And that came, tragically, in a specific act of violence, the assassination of Charlie Kirk on September 10th, 2025. Kirk, he founded Turning Point USA when he was just 18. He was only 31. And he was one of the very few figures who could actually mediate between the different MAGA factions. He was that bridge between the youth wing and the establishment.
And then he was shot.
Shot in the neck by Tyler James Robinson, a 22-year-old who authorities described as politically radicalized. He opened fire during an outdoor debate event.
And the analysis sets a really dark context for this, noting it wasn't some isolated incident. It came after a whole series of volatile political events in 2025, the shootings of Democratic legislators in Minnesota, the killing of Israeli embassy staffers, that arson attack on Governor Josh Shapiro's home.
Right.
That kind of atmosphere must have made the structural fracture almost inevitable.
It made it explosive. Kirk's death immediately created this massive vacuum, and, crucially, it created a focal point for all these conflicting narratives. Novin notes that before the body was even cold, conspiracy theories about the assassination were just spreading like wildfire, and they immediately became ammunition in the factional warfare we saw escalate just 3 months later.
Which brings us to America Fest 2025. in Phoenix right before Christmas. It was supposed to honor Kirk's legacy as this great unifier, but instead, it became the stage for the most public rupture in conservative politics.
Exactly. And the source material really emphasizes that the fight that followed wasn't actually about the specific people involved, like Nick Fuentes. Fuentes was just a proxy variable, a stand-in for three much deeper, unresolved structural disputes.
Okay, let's nail those down. What were the three disputes that were sort of manifesting through this Fuentes debate?
First, it's the fight over boundary setting versus coalition elasticity. Should the movement have rigid ideological borders and kick out people like Fuentes? Or should it prioritize being as big as possible, welcoming anyone who opposes the current regime?
Okay, so purity versus size.
Right. Second, the fight over authority. Does authority come from the traditional institutions, think tanks, established media, or from just pure resonance with the grassroots base?
And the third?
The third is the fundamental one. Is the goal governance winning and then responsibly managing the state, or is it perpetual insurgency, just staying in a permanent state of glorious opposition?
And this all came to a head on the very first night. Ben Shapiro opens the conference with what the source calls a declaration of factional war. He demanded ideological border control. He was essentially drawing a red line in the sand.
Yeah, Shapiro's whole argument was that these frauds and charlatans who were trafficking in violent conspiracy theories were an existential danger, and that hosts, no matter what they say about free speech, they are responsible for the ideas they platform.
And he really didn't hold back. He went after absolutely everyone he felt was compromising the brand.
Oh, he did. He specifically called out Tucker Carlson for hosting, and I'm quoting here, a Hitler apologist, Nazi-loving, anti-American piece of refuse like Nick Fuentes. He said Carlson had to own that.
Wow.
He then accused Candace Owens of spreading wild conspiracy theories about Kirk's death, these unsubstantiated claims about Israeli involvement. He even called Steve Bannon a PR flack for Jeffrey Epstein. He was escalating the personal attacks dramatically. This was a full-on demand for an ideological house cleaning.
Wait, so he hit Carlson, Owens, and Bannon all in one speech? That must have been an electric moment on the ground. What was Carlson's reaction to that?
Barely an hour later, Carlson gets on stage, and his response was just pure, calculated mockery. It was a strategy designed to completely dismiss the authority of his critic. He said he watched Shapiro and just laughed, dismissing the whole thing as manufactured. He said, and this is a direct quote, "The supposed civil war going on within that group, I don't think it's real."
That denial is a powerful tactic, isn't it? If you already question the source of authority, you don't argue with the accusations, you just deny the crisis even exists.
Exactly. Carlson reframed that call for ideological border control as an assault on free speech itself. And that was especially powerful at an event for a man who died exercising that very freedom. His message was, this isn't a fight over ideas, it's the weak establishment trying to regain control of a conversation that's left them behind.
And then Bannon gets up there the next night and just aggressively escalates it, taking it completely out of the realm of decorum.
Bannon's move was to change the entire frame.
Yeah.
He accused Shapiro of being part of the Israel First crowd, basically suggesting Shapiro's real agenda was to subordinate American interests to Israel's. And this is an incredible and unprecedented shift.
Right.
For decades, support for Israel was the ultimate unifying position in Republican circles. It was considered totally beyond debate. By questioning it, Bannon was exposing a deep fracture that had been suppressed since the Cold War ended.
The public spectacle at AmericaFest got all the attention, but the analysis points out that the real, tangible structural failure was happening almost at the same time, with the total implosion of a key institution, the Heritage Foundation. This is where we see those pillars actually failing.
The collapse of Heritage shows you exactly what happens when institutional legitimacy just vanishes. I mean, Heritage was arguably the intellectual backbone of the modern conservative movement. It's where policy was created, codified, sustained. The tipping point actually came a little earlier, on October 30th, 2025. The president of Heritage, Kevin Roberts, defended Carlson's Fuentes interview. He declared that Heritage would not cancel our own people.
So an attempt to maintain that coalition elasticity we talked about.
Yes, but the source emphasizes it costs the institution its autonomy. And that defense triggered what Novin calls the cascade. The condemnation was swift, but the consequences were structural. The first wave was immediate.
What happened?
Young Jewish conservatives resigned from Heritage's anti-Semitism task force. The Zionist Organization of America withdrew its partnership. So right there, that signals a complete failure to unite key religious and foreign policy factions.
And then the intellectual erosion began.
It did. Key board members, People like the renowned moral philosopher Robert P. George, they resigned in protest. They said they couldn't stay without a full retraction. But the real institutional disintegration, that climaxed on December 22nd, right as America Fest was wrapping up.
That was the mass exodus that really shocked Washington.
Yes, more than a dozen staffers. We're talking key legal and economic people like Amy Swearer, their top expert on Second Amendment law, and Rachel Gressler, a vital economic policy mind. They all left in one go. And they didn't just quit. They migrated almost overnight to Mike Pence's think tank, Advancing American Freedom, nearly doubling its size.
So the key takeaway here, according to the analysis, is pretty profound. It shows the substitution of actual policy expertise for just loyalty and factional branding. When you lose people like Swearer and Gressler, you literally lose the ability to write a serious legal brief or propose a viable economic plan.
The movement lost its essential self-correction feedback loop. And this institutional failure connects right back to that Israel fracture that Bannon exploited at America Fest. For decades, support for Israel was the ideological glue. It bound together evangelicals, neoconservatives, the military establishment. Now, these positions are irreconcilable, and they're out in the open.
Let's break those down, the new irreconcilable position.
Okay, so on one side, you have Carlson's position, pure non-interventionism. The mantra is America first, and that means not fighting other people's wars, period, whether in the Middle East or Eastern Europe.
Right.
Then you have Bannon, who argues from a place of economic nationalism. He says aid to Israel is indefensible while Americans are struggling with debt and crumbling infrastructure at home.
And there's a generational aspect to this, too.
A huge one. Younger conservatives, they just lack the Cold War assumptions that defined the movement for 50 years. Plus, they've been exposed to totally different narratives, including Palestinian viewpoints through social media that just bypasses all the traditional conservative media filters. The unifying position is gone.
So if support for Israel is no longer a unifying issue, then what exactly is the movement uniting around? This puts a ton of pressure on figures like J.D. Vance, who's been floated as a potential 2028 candidate, especially after getting Erica Kirk's endorsement. And Vance's approach to all this is what the analysis calls strategic ambiguity. He publicly refused to do purity tests or denounce controversial figures by name. He said Trump didn't build his coalition through endless self-defeating purity tests.
And this is what the analysis calls the Vance dilemma. He has to somehow unite these now incompatible factions, the nationalists, populists, libertarians, and convert all that raw grievance into responsible governance, but without defining any clear boundaries.
A strategy that might postpone a schism, but sounds unsustainable for actually governing.
Exactly. You can't really run a government when your core philosophy is just, we hate the other side. And that tension, the movement's inability to define itself, is rooted in the final, critical diagnosis from the source: the dissolution of fusionism. This is the fundamental structural breakdown.
Explain fusionism.
Fusionism was the grand consensus. It was the Cold War-era synthesis of three distinct things: economic libertarianism, low taxes; free trade social traditionalism, so evangelical values; and aggressive anti-communism. And the external threat of the Soviet Union was the high-powered glue that held all those conflicting parts together.
But when the Soviet Union disappeared, the glue dissolved. Trump's rise was basically the final abandonment of fusionism. He rejected free trade, he rejected neoconservatism, but the crucial part, as Novin points out, is that he only suspended the contradictions. He never actually resolved them.
And now, those contradictions are roaring back. They're exposed by the vacuum of Trump's approaching departure, which means we have to loop back to the figure that started the whole America Fest fight, Nick Fuentes. Why does he matter beyond just the moral outrage?
The analysis says we should view figures like him as political data. So what does their rising popularity actually tell us about the conservative base?
It reflects a profound meritocracy crisis among young conservatives. I mean, think about it. For decades, they've been told, work hard, go to college, defer gratification, and you will get that stable, middle-class life your parents had. But for this generation, those promises ring completely hollow.
Because the game feels rigged.
They've watched college become financially ruinous, housing become unaffordable, and they see elite institutions practicing what they believe is just nepotism and corruption. Traditional conservatism's advice: be patient, work harder. It feels like a complete betrayal.
And when the establishment conservatives only offer denunciation against figures like Fuentes, it just confirms the narrative for these young people, the narrative that the elites care more about ideological respectability than their actual struggles.
Precisely. And figures like Fuentes fill that void. They offer community, a sense of belonging, and crucially, a narrative that blames external enemies, elites, globalists, whoever, instead of confirming a personal sense of inadequacy that maybe their hard work failed. It's a structurally generated phenomenon.
So we're left with this fundamental diagnosis. American conservatism is rebelling because its organizing purpose has just dissolved. Anger has become both its motive force and its identity. And it's a structural failure that no amount of rhetoric seems capable of fixing right now.
And that's really the limitation of all the major players we've talked about. Shapiro offers boundaries, but he doesn't address the sociological conditions that create the boundary violators in the first place. Carlson offers permanent critique without any constructive policy alternatives. Bannon offers revolution without stability. And Vance offers ambiguity without clarity. None of them are solving the structural crisis.
So the decisive question then isn't who succeeds Trump in 2028 or, who wins these skirmishes at AmericaFest. It's whether conservatism can articulate the four essential things that any governing movement needs to function. We see the lack of a theory of authority in the heritage collapse. Nobody could agree on who was legitimate enough to set the boundaries. We see the lack of a theory of the common good in the Israel fracture, where different interests are now just irreconcilable.
The challenge facing the movement is immense. Can it establish a theory of legitimacy that the entire coalition actually accepts? Can it define a theory of the common good that goes beyond just simple opposition to the left? And critically, can it find a path from grievance to construction? How does all that energy actually become responsible statecraft?
The decisive question is whether this movement, as large and energized as it is, can find new organizing principles to channel its energy into responsible governance, or if this structural incoherence is just going to lead to further and maybe increasingly radical fragmentation. And that question really is going to define the next decade of American politics.